Hey, church family, Pastor Michael here, and I want to tell you first of all that I love you and I miss you, and I cannot wait to get together with you and have fellowship again in person. If you're a visitor here, we're covering the events of the Passion Week leading up to the resurrection, and today I'm honored and privileged to be discussing the Last Supper that occurs on Thursday. Our text will be Matthew 26, verses 17 through 35, Mark chapter 14, verses 12 through 31, Luke chapter 22, verses 1 through 23, and John chapter 13, verses 1 through 38. I'm not going to read them to you. I'm going to kind of summarize them and give a brief synopsis, but I encourage you to read them in your free time and meditate over them. So here we are on Thursday. What is taking place? Jesus is coming to his hour, and he's going to celebrate the Passover dinner with his disciples. And so there's a room prepared for them in the upper room of a man's house, and he sends Peter and John to go and meet this man to get the room, to go and get in the room and get ready for their arrival. And so Jesus is going to have this very intimate time with his disciples in the Lord's Supper, and this is the implementation of the church ordinance that we celebrate periodically by taking of the Lord's Supper, the grape juice, and the bread. And so it's a very special time. We make a proclamation that we look forward to the return of Jesus because, as I'll explain here in a little bit, that is what Jesus said before he or after he had taken the Last Supper with his disciples, that he would not partake again of the supper until he was gathered with them in his Father's kingdom, and they would have a feast there again. And so that is why we do it. We do it as a proclamation, as a remembrance, and to look forward to the time where we get to celebrate with the King at the feast in heaven, as it ought to be, with all the saints gathered. So Jesus is getting ready for the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Jesus' hour has come, and the book of John talks about this hour that's coming for Jesus. And in the beginning, we see that Jesus' hour has not yet come, but now it has. And what does that mean? What it means is simply this: the time that Jesus was going to go to the cross and to die is here. And so Jesus takes his time of intimacy in this upper room to share a meal with the disciples, to give them an object lesson, and to encourage them. And he explains very clearly and very plainly what is about to take place. So Jesus sits down at the table, and they start to have fellowship with one another. But then Jesus gets up and he starts washing the disciples' feet. He's teaching them an object lesson. Now Peter is hesitant to allow this. He says, "No, Jesus, do not wash my feet. I cannot allow you, Lord, to wash my feet." Peter is saying that he is not worthy to have the Lord wash his feet. But Jesus says to Peter, "If I don't do this, then you don't have a part in my kingdom with me." And so what Jesus is teaching here is he's teaching that the master is humbling himself to serve the servants, if you will. And so that teaches all the disciples, each disciple is unique with their own gifts and abilities. We're all unique with our own gifts and abilities. But none of us is more important than the other. We need each other. And that's what Jesus is showing them, that they ought to do this for one another, is what he says to them. And so they sat down after Jesus washes the disciples' feet. He sits down at the table and he begins to have the Lord's Supper with them. And he even exposes an unbeliever in their midst. And Judas was a disciple, but he was so good at playing the game, going through the motions, that he even fooled Peter and John and the rest of the other disciples. But Jesus knew his heart. His heart was not with Jesus. He wanted to know what he could use Jesus for, get out of Jesus, rather than what he could share with Jesus. And Jesus is all about a relationship. And so it brings up this question at dinner: who is it, Lord? Is it me? Is it me? Is it me? The disciples are asking each other. And Jesus very clearly exposes that it's Judas that will betray him. It is Judas that does not believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And so Jesus very plainly exposes this to them. He says to them, the reason why he's saying these things is so they can be encouraged, but also so they know that he is sovereign over all things, and this is God's will, and it must take place in this manner. Now Peter again says, "No, Lord, this cannot be. I will not allow you to die I will die in your place. And Jesus exposes to Peter what's about to take place in the next few hours, that Peter will deny Jesus, not only once, um, but multiple times. And so Peter remembers that after it takes place. But that's a little bit further in the future. So Jesus encourages his disciples to love one another, and then Jesus exposes his sovereignty, and that Jesus exposes the plan of God, the will of God, and what must be accomplished in his life. And so, what can we take from these things? What encouragement can we have, church, by looking at the Lord's Supper? First of all, we need to understand that God's will is never thwarted by the plans of man, that God is sovereign over all the plans of man, first of all. So take heart, church. No decision that you've ever made is going to completely remove you from the will of God, unless it is an unrepentant heart and unbelief that Jesus is the Son of God and the Savior of the world, and the Savior from your sin. Also, church, take heart, and that when we take the Lord's Supper, this is a proclamation and this is an encouragement that we are going to have this feast with Jesus himself, and he will partake of this with us. And so we look forward to that day. And so we are encouraged by that. We look forward to the return of Christ. So live on purpose. Live with a purpose that Jesus is coming back, and he's coming back soon. And lastly, the other thing that we can learn from this text is that we ought to serve one another, we ought to be humble with one another, and we ought to act and lead as Jesus led by serving one another. I hope that you guys have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you again. Love you. God bless.